Hi, I'm Freya. I am from England and I am donor conceived. I grew up with two mums in the 90s and I have always known that I'm donor conceived. They have been very open my entire life that me and my full sister were created using a donor, and they had lovely conversations and were very transparent and had all of the words they possibly could in the 90s and made sure that I could ask any questions that I wanted to. But I was not particularly curious, I'd say, growing up. But being donor conceived was always there. It was always a factor of who I was. And as I got older, I maybe got slightly more curious about siblings and our donor. But my parents used a donor with a clinic in the UK, and it was 1994. Therefore, the laws were he was completely anonymous and there was lifelong anonymity. The laws changed fairly soon after, but not quick enough for me. So that meant I had grown up being told that there will be no chance I will get to meet my donor. That will not happen. And my parents did express the fact they actually didn't like that. They wished that was different. But I did get told I could meet my siblings. So a lot of my donor conceived life was being quite excited about having a number of half siblings that I would get to meet. And yeah, I got excited when I turned 18 and thought I'd get to meet loads of them. And then that trickled in. So being an adult has taken longer to figure out some of my half siblings. I've had the joy of being able to find my donor by chance as an adult. And I've gone on to have two donor conceived children with my wife as well. And I'm a known egg donor as well. So I've taken being donor conceived and I've run with it because I think it's a fascinating part of who I am and I'm quite proud of it.
All right. So lots of different angles that we can dig deeper into there. I think the first I'll begin with, just to stay in chronological order here, is when your mothers explained this to you as a young child. Do you remember what that conversation was like? I mean, it sounds like you were pretty young, but did they kind of help fill in what actually went down when it was first brought to light?
So I don't remember one sit-down conversation per se. I think my parents did quite a good job of starting quite early. So I have no memory of not knowing. And we always knew about the fact they needed to use a donor. They did it through a clinic. So we knew some of those kind of steps. And we knew some of the basic details about what the donor looked like. However, as I got older, I did realize that my parents maybe didn't give quite enough information and thought we'd fill in the gaps. And actually, my younger sister admitted when we were adults that she had assumed that our biological mum just walked into a hospital and chose any man that was waiting for any procedure and used him to have a child. And it took her quite a long time to realize that wasn't how it worked. So maybe they hadn't gone into quite enough detail, but the donor had always been on our kind of periphery. It was quite a casual conversation, really, in the household, I'd say.
Okay. And you and your sister that you were raised with, are you full siblings? Same donor?
Yes. Yeah.
You are. Okay. Cool. And then I guess talk to me a little bit about how much or how little information you had related to donor half siblings. This was something that you knew, it sounds like you knew that they were out there, but did you know how many there were? And did it weigh on you to not know their identities as a child?
Yeah, so I always knew that I did have half siblings. I didn't know the full number until I turned 16. And then the way that the HFEA works in the UK, which is the Human Fertilization and Embryology Association, I think I've got that in the right order, and they monitor everything in terms of donor conception that's done through a clinic. So they sent me a letter when I turned 16, and it had a table on it, and it had the years of birth and the genders of each of my half siblings. So that was quite an exciting letter to get at 16. And my sister was 4 years younger, so she got to get that information as well. And we knew at that point that there were 15 of us. So we had 13 half siblings. I was one of the oldest in 1994, and my sister was the youngest, the only in 1998. So we knew that within 4 years, there were 15 of us. And that was all the information we got at 16. But we were told when I turned 18, I could apply to the donor sibling link so that I could potentially match with some of our siblings. I was very excited about that. It did weigh heavily knowing that there were a lot out there when I got that table. I was desperate to have some faces in my head. I didn't even really need to know them fully. I just wanted to know what they looked like. And the fact that I could suddenly realize they were all kind of my age and very close in age, it made it very real at 16 that I could potentially bump into a half sibling. and have no idea. And especially being someone that was about to go to university in a different part of the country. And yeah, it's that bit was when I started to go, oh, that might be quite an uphill climb, I guess, to make some sense of that part of my kind of family, I guess.
Right. And when you got this information, did you notice if like you had a radar up for like siblings out and about that maybe looked like you, that you'd question, hey, maybe this is one of them?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
And we still do now, in terms of, I don't know all my half siblings now. There's about half of us in contact, but I still do. I've never really lost that radar that I maybe developed at 16. And the second someone looks vaguely like me, I'm like, yeah. And I often did it with the donor as well. I would always kind of have a little lookout for anyone that I thought looked vaguely like me or my sister. But we did find out later that the information my parents were given at the clinic was word of mouth, basically. So they had his characteristics written down. They didn't get a choice of donor. They were given a donor. They were told his hair color and eye color, height, weight, vague interests. It fit into about that much on a page. That was awful for a podcast. It fit into about 3 lines on a page. And one of the pieces of information my parents were given by word of mouth was that my donor was a street performer. And my parents really liked this because they are both professional musicians. So they thought, that's great. That's, there's some similarities there. They didn't know for sure he was a musician, but
yeah.
Street performer, they thought artistic, great, that fits. And so every time I went to Camden Market or Covent Garden in London, which are big hotspots for street performers, and that was where I was conceived in London, we moved away, but I would always have an eye out. It didn't matter that it'd been years. I would keep an eye out for street performers, and my friends did the same. It became a running joke. So we all had an eye out for who looks like Freya. Yeah.
That's funny. And it sounds like, interestingly, the clinic that you came from seemed to have their shit together to some degree, a little bit more than others, because it sounds like you know the exact number of half siblings. Is that fair to say?
So the number did change at one point. So the table I got was the table that one of my half siblings also had. So when we met, we could kind of double check that. Yeah, that matches. And then when I did meet my donor years later, he applied to the HFEA to remove his anonymity. And he was then sent a letter in the process of all of his offspring. And his table had 2 extras on it. One that was born after 1998, that threw me a lot because I'd always had in my head, my sister is the youngest. And that was just my kind of bookend. And then we suddenly had one a year later. And also another one that they said, we don't know if this resulted in a birth because we just had the pregnancy and then no one came and registered. So we did find that person, my half brother, and he found out his mother had never gone and registered that. So that was an extra one. And then this new one added on. So we've expanded to 17. But still I like knowing roughly. That feels quite safe to me. I will add, however, that all of the information about the street performer turned out to be completely false and wasn't my donor. And when I did meet him and got to ask, he looked a little bit confused and then went, oh, but my housemate donated at the same time and he was a street performer. So they'd taken the brief information about his housemate, mixed it up and used it for that.
Wow. Okay.
So, yeah.
Not as organized as I initially perceived.
Maybe not.
Okay. All right. So you've mentioned that you have met your donor. I'm curious, 1, how did that go? What did it feel like to actually get that chance? And then 2, you also noted that he opted to remove his anonymity. I'm curious if you're aware of what pushed him in that direction.
So meeting my donor was purely by chance. I did all of the ancestry and my heritage sites when I was kind of early 20s, mainly to find siblings because I signed up for the donor sibling link at 18 and then I had no matches for ages. And I was a little bit gutted by that. I did realize I was one of the eldest, so that the rest of them hadn't yet turned 18 potentially. But I was a bit gutted because I'd really built up that moment. My parents got me an ancestry test and then a few years later a my heritage test. And so I did them and then nothing came from them. But during COVID, I was heavily pregnant and bored and stuck at home because I couldn't go anywhere. And so I started looking into my family tree a little bit more and building the family trees on Ancestry. And during that process, I matched with a second cousin who was in Canada. And that was interesting because I don't have any relatives that I know of in Canada. And it was fairly close in terms of second cousin. And he was very interested in family trees. So we got chatting and he said, why don't you put your details, your raw data onto GED GEDmatch, which I'd never heard of. And I said, okay, I'll do that as long as you can guide me through that, because we couldn't figure out how we were related. So I put my data on there and he came back and said, right, I've had a look. You've got another second cousin, but he's not related to me. So one of us is paternal, one of us is maternal. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. So I messaged the other second cousin, and it was actually it was the second cousin's mum who'd uploaded all the data. And she, again, was someone dead into her family tree, and she was in America. So I was like, okay, a little bit further again, I still don't know how we're potentially linked. And she said she wanted to find out. She was sort of really digging and was like, I want to make sense of this match. And then I explained, well, I'm donor conceived. I don't know any of my paternal side, so I can't kind of corroborate any of the information. And she came back with an email going, oh, I think I might know who your dad is, and then vanished. And then I didn't hear from her for weeks. And I was heavily pregnant, so I forgot. And then I gave birth, and I genuinely did not think about it again. And then I was about a month postpartum, and I was up in the night doing a night feed of my newborn, and I got an email 3-4 in the morning, and it was from this woman again, the mother of my second cousin. And she said, I was right. The person that I thought was your father is your father. Here you go. And had linked both of us in an email with our email addresses. And it turns out she'd figured it out that she knew of a nephew in England who had donated his sperm and got him to do one of the ancestry tests, and it had come back as a paternal match. So she'd done all of the digging for me and figured it all out, and then just passed on the information. So suddenly out of nowhere, I'd never once sought out really finding him. I didn't expect that to happen. And suddenly I had his email address and his name. Yeah, very trippy.
Yeah, I bet. And what did you do after that? Like, you have this information. What's the first thought in your mind? Were you thinking, I need to reach out immediately? Or did you sit on it for a little while? Yeah.
I wanted to email back straight away, and my wife was like, maybe that's not a good idea at 4 a.m.
Yeah.
So I did wait. And the next day I sent an email, and I the first line of it, I said, look, you signed up to total anonymity. So if you are still wanting that, I respect that, and that's fine. Kind of looking back now, if he's said, yeah, okay, I do want that, I would have been gutted. But in the moment, I really meant it. I was like, actually, you really didn't plan for this. I don't want to be an interrupter and come in and ruin everything. So thankfully, he replied almost straight away with a really lovely long email saying, no, I've often thought about, those people that are going to be out there that I've sort of helped create. And I've often wondered how you're all getting on. And yeah, he threw himself into it pretty much straight away. My donor, I already had some of my half siblings in contact with me at the time. So I became the kind of link to be like, okay, I'm going to pass on the details. So suddenly he didn't just have one daughter. He had 3 daughters and 3 sons, I think, at that point, out of the blue. So suddenly we had all of that information. And we got on almost instantly. When we started talking and having phone calls, it was very, very natural. And I'm very glad that it happened purely by chance. And he really threw himself into it. He wanted to remove his anonymity because he didn't like the fact that he'd never been told he could. He said, if I'd ever been told that had changed and they'd properly updated past donors, I would have done it in a heartbeat. He was like, I wouldn't have wanted to have stayed anonymous. So even though he kind of thought, realistically, most people that I now find are going to be on things like the sibling link or something like that first, they're not going to get the information elsewhere. But he was like, I want that to be there. Or any sort of other offspring, and we've got like 8 left, I want them to have that option.
Yeah.
And he's really, at no point has it seemed to throw him that all of these sort of people have appeared that are related to him. And he's really taken it in his stride.
That's great. I love to hear that. And does he have a family of his own that he's raised, or he does?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. He's got 2 teenage daughters. So that was one thing that was quite difficult to navigate at the beginning, because he was very open about the fact that he'd actually donated sperm, hence why his aunt had known about it. So he'd never really hidden that side of it, and his ex-wife had known. So it wasn't something he had to reveal to her, which was a bonus. But his daughters were too young to have really had that conversation. So he waited a while, and then it got a little bit, sort of not uncomfortable, but we were starting to go, look, I'm online, I post online, you have teenage daughters. Like, I'm not naming, I never named him in those days. I didn't put his face anywhere, but I was like, but it would be really uncomfortable if they ever saw me and didn't know. So eventually he sort of had the conversation with them and just said, look, that these guys are out there if you ever want to talk. And both of them were quite interested in pictures, but they haven't wanted to connect yet, but also they're teenagers. So I fully get it. But yeah, that was maybe something I had never anticipated. When we'd been given updated information on our donor when I was like a teenager, the updated one that I got at 18 said he had no children. But I now kind of know that those things that are updated aren't updated. I'd really thought that was something that they had gathered, whilst I was a teenager and kept it updated as they went. But no, it was very much when he donated. But he was a student when he donated. So of course he didn't have a family and children. So yeah, that had thrown me a bit, I guess, when I did find that out.
Yeah. Okay. And then when you did initially meet the donor, what were some of the things that you saw in him that were reflections of yourself that maybe kind of fit the missing puzzle pieces and put them all together for you?
So our first phone call was probably the point when I don't know if it was missing, but it was the moment of recognition almost. We could talk very easily straight away. Yeah. And something I found fascinating, and I've joked about this, it's not going to make any sense for you because you're American, but when I first started speaking to him, he sounded like he had a Radio 4 voice, which is a very kind of plummy, warm sounding, vaguely posh radio voice. And it was the kind of voice that my mum would have loved. And my mum passed away before she had a chance to meet any of my half siblings or find out about knowing my donor. So the fact that I could listen to him and hear him speak, and he was quite intelligent and educated and thoughtful. And I just went, oh, Mum would have really liked him. She would have really liked him. And that was almost like a bit of a blessing to me to be able to throw myself into getting to know him. Mm-hmm. And we have a lot in common that's nothing major, but just stuff that we can really talk about. We both really love gruesome true crimes and gangsters, and he loves telling me stories of when he was a student in Liverpool, and I'm now up near Liverpool, which I never grew up near. Suddenly I'm up near where he was when he donated. So we have a lot of connections that feel very comfortable and easy.
Yeah. Okay.
And same in my half siblings, really, in the sense that I just feel like I recognize myself in them. Nothing massive, no kind of, oh my God, we're twins, but just little bits. And the reason I knew at 4 a.m. when I found out his name, he has quite an unusual surname. So we did Google him at 4 a.m. and an old Twitter profile came up, and it had a very small picture where you have to like zoom in to see it. And we zoomed in and almost instantly went, oh, that's got to be him, because he had my half-sister's smile, like just utterly, I could have copied and pasted it. And that was, well, in a sense was very nice for me because I could go, I know it's definitely that person. Yeah. Again, a little bit of a puzzle piece, a bit of a kind of, oh, that makes sense. That fits there. That works. And it felt very satisfying.
Right. And then as you met some of these half siblings that you're just finding out about, were there things that you noticed in them that were strikingly similar, or is it all kind of the same as what you had seen in the donor already?
Well, for a starter, more of my half siblings are queer or LGBT than straight, which has been really lovely, actually. We sort of joke every time we find a new one, like, oh, which team are they on? But that's been really kind of nice in a sense that I was the bridesmaid at my half-sister's wedding to her wife. And it was like, I wish she could have been that when I got married, but I hadn't known her. Yeah, and small things. My half-sister and I probably are the closest. And when we hang out, we have the same tone of voice, but she has a northern accent and I have a southern accent. And if you just switch it, we would sound identical, and we have the same laugh. And when we first got each other's names on our sibling match, she said she was scrolling through my Facebook and found a video of me laughing, and she thought it was herself. It really sort of threw her off. And we've really enjoyed kind of just hearing ourselves next to each other. It just really kind of slightly strange and surreal, but also very comforting at the same time. Yeah.
Trippy, like you kind of alluded to before. And then I guess talk to me a little bit about the experience of finding all of this out alongside your raised sister, because she's also part of the mix, right?
She is. She has a very different view, I guess, of all of this. She because she was younger, she was never the one that was applying for things like the donor sibling link. That was always me. And when you apply to the donor sibling link and you get a match with the HFEA, you actually have to have a mandated hour of counselling. But again, I had that and my sister didn't. So that was, again, a bit of a strange, I had to almost pass down what I'd been told in the counselling session. And so when we did have our first sibling match, we were really excited together. I was like on the phone with her whilst we were scrolling through their social medias and trying to be like, oh my God, look at this, look at this. But I remember her saying at one point, she was like, what if they are, well, she said, what if they're Tories? What if they're Conservative? We just had this moment of like, we don't know these people. What if we suddenly have a look? It was around the general election. And we were like, oh my God, what if we find out? And I said, well, we don't know. We won't know. Like, they could be, but we also weren't raised with them. Like, we're going to have potentially very different views. And I think that was the moment where I went, we might be approaching this slightly differently. And she's just she's liked to go along for the ride, but she's not thrown herself in the same way I have. It's not been as interesting to her as it was for me. She likes hearing all the stories. She's met up with a couple of them once, and she's, I think, spoken to our donor once on the phone. And that's kind of enough for her. She's like, that's ticked what I wanted. And yeah, I mean, I don't know whether that will change. She's someone that's a bit of a slow burner. She'll kind of suddenly decide, maybe I'll go a little bit more in here. But I've always kept her updated. But it's something I say to people a lot when they ask about, does my child need a sibling if they're donor conceived so they can go through the experience with someone else? And I said, it doesn't necessarily mean they will go through the experience together, because they're their own people. Right. They're going to have very different personality types potentially. And I already see it in my daughters. I don't think they're going to have the same approach to the fact that they are donor conceived as each other. So yeah, I'm very glad I have her there. And I always go to her and give her the stories and the updates. But we are kind of taking it on different roads, really. I've got to fly.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Hey, whatever works. It definitely, there's no right or wrong way to go about this. And sometimes people feel a little more comfortable just taking more of a back seat to it. So talk to me a little bit about being a recipient parent and having donor conceived children of your own. Are there things that you learned from your own experience and the way that your parents, share this information with you that you look at and you say, oh yeah, I'm going to apply that to how I raise my own children, or maybe I'm not going to apply that because I don't think that was helpful. How does that play out for you?
So now my life is very donor conception related, and I'm very into that world. But before having children, I wasn't really. I didn't give it a huge amount of thought, and it was just something that existed for me in my life. It wasn't a big thing. And so when we decided we wanted children, my wife and I said, okay, well, we did debate a known donor. We didn't really have someone in our life that we felt safe enough with that. So we said, okay, well, my parents went down the clinic route. Let's go down the clinic route. And when we found a donor that we liked, I already said, well, I've got more information on him than I ever had on my donor. At least that's changed. And we knew that they'd be able to find him at 18 because we now have open ID in this country. So I just kind of went along with, yeah, that makes sense. It works for my parents. It works for us. And everything went very smoothly, and we got pregnant very easily. And it was only when I was pregnant that I started thinking about being donor conceived myself. And I joined some Facebooks that were kind of donor conception related, more so like support side. I wasn't seeking support, but I guess I wanted to find community. And very, very quickly went, maybe this isn't, this maybe isn't fully where I want to be, because I hadn't really realized it was something that was not as straightforward for everybody as it had been for me. And that was very naive of me, but also I'd never really met anyone else that was donor conceived through any means differently than a queer family that had always known. So I'd never even considered that there was another kind of route, I guess. And so when I was then had a newborn and seeing stuff about donor conception, I felt very thrown. I suddenly went, oh, this is not what I expected. I hadn't given this as much thought as I should have. And it knocked me a little bit. And I lost a bit of my confidence in how I was maybe raising my children or how we'd conceived our children. Even things like the fact that the clinic had not once talked to me about the fact that I was donor conceived and I was then having donor conceived children. They didn't talk to me about the fact that I have half siblings I don't know, that we are using sperm from a guy that I don't know. And all of the things that now I've had very small panic attacks about, that I've managed to go on to try and figure out and I'm okay about. But I suddenly had this world of, no one told me this.
Right.
No one talked to me about the risks. And I love my parents dearly, but they had probably been as naive as I was about the extra bits of being donor conceived. Things like not knowing who your half siblings are and you might potentially sleep with one, or things like not knowing sort of medical information and stuff like that. As much as I was aware of things, it
Yeah.
wasn't ever really talked about, and I didn't know the full extent of that. So now the way that we are raising our children is we're being very open at the beginning, as my parents were. We're having those conversations really early on. Our 5-year-old could very confidently tell you about sperm and eggs and having babies. She knows about the fact that she has a donor. Our 3-year-old is getting there. But the things we will be doing differently will be talking to them about potential risks, about the fact that they have lots of half siblings. And we will also be starting to try and find their half siblings a lot earlier.
Yeah.
Because now that we have the ability to, it feels not negligent, but if it's there, it feels silly not to seize that and try.
Right.
So actually tomorrow we're meeting one of their half sisters for the first time. And we've never
Wow.
done this before. We haven't introduced them as half siblings yet. They know that she's there. This will be the first time meeting. But it's important to us that we start that journey now for them as kids,
Yeah.
so that they're not having to navigate it as adults, as I have been, because it's been hard navigating half sibling relationships as an adult as well.
Right.
So yeah, some
Okay.
things I'm carrying on the same and other things I'm revamping.
Got it. And how does your daughter seem about this meetup? Is she excited? Is she indifferent? What's the vibe there?
She's kind of indifferent. She kind of
Yeah.
knows she likes seeing photos. So we've sat and looked at pictures of her half sister, and every time, because I've brought it up a couple of times casually and dropped it in, but it got to the point last night where I mentioned it again as the fact that it's now going to be, on this day. And she went, "Oh, Mummy, can we talk about something else?" It's like, yeah, sure. So she's very chill about it. She's very nonchalant. And that might change once she maybe meets her, and I don't know what direction it will go in, but this feels bigger than any other half siblings that probably in the future might feel, because it's the first.
Right.
So, but I'm very glad that she is on the side of, I'm all right with it. It's fine. She grasps the fact that it's a half sister, and that means that we don't live with her and she's not going to grow up with her, but she understands it's the same donor. It's actually been very handy, the fact that I'm donor conceived, with this conversation, because I can
Yeah.
talk about all of my half brothers and sisters, and she knows of them loosely, their auntie so-and-so and whatever. She knows that they're there.
Yeah.
So she can grasp the fact, like, oh yeah, like you have Auntie Lydia, I have my half sister. So
Right.
that's been very helpful.
Yeah, you have the lived experience of it all.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I hope that all goes well with the meetup.
Thank you.
I'm excited for you. All right. And then I guess on a general note, could you talk to me a little bit about just, what the biggest challenges, either as a donor conceived person or as a recipient parent, what those might be? And then on the flip side, what has been the biggest positive out of your experience being donor conceived?
I think the biggest challenge being donor conceived has been not feeling fully in control of finding information about myself. So like medical information, stuff like that, but also information about half siblings. I love that I have so many connections now with half siblings, and there are like 9 of us in contact with each other now. 8, 9, I get that wrong every time, but there's still 8 out there. And knowing that they're out there, but not knowing them, is, for somebody like me who really likes to be in control of stuff, is really hard. And having to let go of all control, really, when it doesn't feel fair, it feels like, but they're my family, they're my relations. I should be able to know even just that they're there. Give me a name and a country or an area, like that would be great.
Yeah.
I don't need to go and befriend them all. It feels like something's being withheld from me, and that feels very unfair.
Mm-hmm.
And then alongside that, navigating relationships with the half siblings that I do have as an adult, and bringing the adult baggage, and having to figure out how to be in someone's life and what level of sort of interaction you want, or how often you want to be in contact with somebody that is very close to you relationship wise, but also not at all. And having to explain that to other people as well has been probably one of the bigger difficulties, I'd say. What was the other question?
The second question to that was thinking about like biggest rewards or biggest positives that have come out of all of this.
I think almost parallel to that, but the relationships, but the fact that I have this amazing relationship with my donor that I did not once expect to be possible, that I now see him as a close friend, like an uncle, like somebody that I can go and share things with. And when I've done something that I'm excited about, I can send him a message and tell him about it. That has been lovely. I'm going to London where he lives in 2 weeks, and I just dropped him a message saying, can we have brunch? And he's like, yes. Like, that has been a genuine joy that I have that, because I never expected to be lucky enough to have that. And I think that that has felt even sweeter by the fact that I don't have one of my mums anymore, and that she passed away 10 years ago and has not got to see any of this amazing development of our family, I guess. But my non-biological mum has been able to see it all, and getting to see her meet my donor, which was very trippy for everyone involved, but getting her to be able to hang out in the same room as him and ask those questions that she said she's had since the day I was born and has never been able to ask, that has been very beautiful to watch. And now my donor is just as involved in everything as I am. He does his own podcasts, he does his own articles, and he's genuinely excited about the world of donor conception. And he's really big on encouraging past donors to remove their anonymity. And it's a world that I don't think there is enough discussion on. And the HFEA have not done enough to tell past donors that they can do that.
Yeah.
So seeing him step up and go, well, someone's got to talk about it and someone's got to be sharing that information, has been really lovely to watch. I feel very proud of the stuff that he's doing, and some of the kind of stereotypes that he's removing, or the kind of fears that other people have that he's kind of breaking down. So that's been a big highlight to watch.
That's awesome. And I can definitely relate to that whole idea of like shifting into a role that you never foresaw, like advocating on behalf of a community that, I think almost all of us are surprised to find that we're part of this. I think you're in the minority who maybe didn't have so much of a shock to it all, but we all have different levels of shock along the way, regardless of how this truth is exposed to us.
Definitely.
Okay. Any other elements to your story that maybe we skipped past? Or if not, do you have any message that you want to put out to the community at large?
I think one thing I'd say in terms of something I'm fascinated about with donor conception is the way that more conversations are happening about it now than I feel like they ever have. And what's come out of that is that people are doing more research before going into donor conception. And part of the reason that I'm a known egg donor is that like I said, I got pregnant very easily. The only thing we needed was sperm because we didn't have it. And I kind of had this moment of going, well, there's going to be people out there that are the same, but they don't have eggs. And I have very healthy eggs. And I kind of just went, I'd really like to be able to do something, but with donor conception, I could not ever donate anonymously. I couldn't, for a starter, that would be terrifying if a sibling ended up with that. So yeah, that's not going to happen. Yeah. But I kind of had this feeling of, I still want to be able to do something. And then I discovered that no egg donation is a thing. And I met a wonderful gay couple that wanted to have their own children. Neither of them are British, so that felt even nicer of like, well, you definitely can't be a sibling. You're out of the age range, you're out of the nationality. And getting to form relationships with them and being able to help them start a family has been realizing how beautiful donor conception can be when it is done well, and when there's those conversations and there's that transparency from birth, and there are sort of so much sort of intention gone into it. And I think queer families in general are doing that quite well, mostly, but opening up the sort of floor to say, just because you think that you've done all your research, keep looking for those stories and keep finding the lived experience, because there's so much of it out there now where there's more and more stories being shared. And I think people are doing that more. They're finding more sort of stories to hear. And that gives me a lot of hope for how it might evolve in the future.
Yeah. Awesome. And I'm glad you brought up the fact that you're an egg donor again, because I definitely would have forgotten to come back to that. So are you aware of how many families you've donated to, or?
Just one. Yeah. Just one. Okay. It's just this couple. So it's done the way I had to donate through a clinic, because I'm always treated like I was an anonymous egg donor. Yeah. But my eggs were frozen and then given directly to this couple. They've then made 8 embryos, which are all very healthy and good embryos, and they are sat on ice waiting for them to get to that point with their surrogate. And they have a lovely friend that they are going through that with at the moment. So we're kind of creating a little bit of a little queer bubble to help these lovely people have children. So at the moment, there are no babies there. But my kids even know, they were dead excited when I was donating my eggs. My eldest was fascinated by the injections and all of this. So we're kind of, one of my things with the guys was, this needs to be something that is incredibly transparent. Everybody has all of the information all of the time. And that the children will grow up knowing they are half siblings. There won't be any of this kind of, oh, you're cousins and you know each other. They'll know directly from birth. And they loved that. They'd already sort of seen me talk about donor conception and they were like, that's what we want. That's the way we want to go about doing it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. That's great. And then as you were deciding to become an egg donor, what did maybe some of the conversations with your partner look like around mothering, and not mothering, but like being the donor of other offspring that you're connected to? Was there any interesting insights there?
We had some conversations. I mean, my wife has been fabulous in general, but it's the way that she's kind of handled the fact that she's a non-biological parent. When we first started talking about that in general, she was like, yeah, but I watch you with your mum that you're not genetically related to and that you guys are best friends and incredibly close. And so she had absolutely no fears going into it, which I already thought was quite unique. I think some people have some fears. And she was like, no, like I get to see all of that in front of me. We're all good. So when it then came to me saying, I want to do this and I'd like to donate my eggs, we had those conversations about, okay, well, do we want any more kids? No. How would we feel if they had a boy? Because we didn't have a boy and there'd been we kind of wanted a boy. And so there was some of that. And we were kind of both sitting down and going, from the second those eggs are out, both of us said, they don't feel really like mine anymore. But the joy of being able to see them have those babies in the future and raise them, we love the fact that we get to watch that. My wife was like, I'm really excited to see them as parents and kind of see what those genetics look like. I think that the father is going to be Greek, so that's fascinating. We're like, that's going to be really interesting.
Yeah.
But my wife kind of said all of it was as a pair. None of it was me doing this with a bit of support. We had to be on board with everything together. And it was almost like we were treating it like my wife was donating her eggs too. Like it was, we're in this together. But we do frequently forget whose genetics we've used all over the place anyway. Like we sort of joked about the fact my wife has ADHD and then going, oh, we should check that with the kids. And then went, no, hang on, that's not there. So yeah, I mean that we've got a whole family of now just completely forgetting who's genetically related to who. But again, it's been really nice to see it done differently with my lovely intended parents. And it feels a little bit like an evolution of donor conception, I guess.
Yeah. All right. Any final words that you want to put out there, or did we?
I think we've covered it. I think we've covered it.
We've covered it. All right. Cool. In that case, I'm gonna hit stop, but it'll take a second for the video to fully upload.